Yes, okay. So I wanted to, for fun, let's just continue with the external. The external. So we'll go back to the 99% versus the 1%. Okay. And really what this is going to get into is the this quote that I really love that says you can measure a society by how it treats its poor. So we can argue that the 99% is a society, and you can measure the 99% by how the 99% treats its poor. Okay. And this all goes back to know thyself, know thy enemy, know thyself, which is interesting because when there's an us versus them dichotomy, there's a lot of value in knowing oneself. If there's a us versus them, look at what they are doing to us, which is a constant theme in the public square, what they are doing to us. Well, if there's a constant theme in the public square of discourse that to look at what they are doing to us, well, it's very important for a person to understand themselves, for the individual to understand themselves. Know thy enemy, know thyself. Like, who am I in this us versus them dichotomy? Am I one of them, or am I part of the us? Who am I, right? So know thy enemy, know thyself, right? So we'll just write that up at the top. Know thy enemy, know the enemy, know the self. And especially if I'm as guilty as the enemy, well then, how am I any different? How can I even differentiate myself from the enemy if I'm doing the very same thing that defines who my enemy is, right? Know thy enemy, know thyself. So we're going with the 1% versus the 1% versus the 99%, and we're talking about society, and the 99% being society, right? Because the 1% doesn't represent the people. We all know this. So the 99% is society. And you can measure a society by how it treats its poor. Like, this is so true, you know. So I'm putting up the diagram. We got know the enemy, know the self. Here's the 1%, and here's the so-called 99%. But then, as I pointed out, well, you've got the upper class that's just below the 1%. Then you've got the upper middle class, which is just below the middle class. Then you've got the middle class. Then you've got the working class. And then you've got, we'll just do two more, and this will be the underclass, you know. So you may not believe that it's true that you can measure a society by how it treats its poor. And I would like to hear the arguments in opposition to that, for someone to say that it's not true. You can't measure a society by how it treats its poor. I would like to hear the argument in opposition to that. But, you know, since poverty is not a sexy, popular, trending subject, we'll never hear the argument in opposition. It's easier. Ignorance is bliss, right? Just ignore that you can measure a society by how it treats its poor. Just ignore that. It's not important, right? Like, this is all hilarious. Don't you understand how hilarious this is? So if this is the 99%, okay, we'll just go like this. This is the 99%. Well, The problem is, if these people down here don't matter at all and are completely ignored, well, then you've just lost like 30%. So you can take that 99% and just cut that down. So it's definitely not 99% because nobody cares about these people down here. And that's another argument. I would love to hear the argument how that's not true, that nobody cares about those people. That's not true. Like, I'd love to hear the argument. But again, we'll never hear it because poverty isn't a sexy, trendy, popular subject, of course. But the 99% is super popular, though, you know, and this whole dichotomy, us versus them, it's all very popular, right? So when we're talking about the 99%, which would require unifying this whole group of people in order to achieve this 99% concept. Well, we can easily eliminate we can easily eliminate 30% of it because none of these people here care at all about these people. These people down here are the useless eaters, right? Isn't that what the 1% likes to call people, the useless eaters? Well, isn't that interesting how the people in the middle here, the so-called 99%, views these as the useless eaters. So there again, know thy enemy, know thyself. So if you do the same thing as the enemy does, well, then how are you any different? You're not. That's how you define the enemy. So if what you define, the actions that you define the enemy to be, you actually practice those same actions yourself by treating these people down here as just a bunch of useless eaters, well, then see, this is all the big joke that the people up at the top keep laughing endlessly about, because all of us, or I'm going to say you down here, do the same thing that you accuse these guys up at the top of. And if you believe they're so stupid that they don't realize this and aren't laughing their asses off like I'm laughing right now, well, then you are a fucking retard. So these guys up at the top, they see that all of you do the exact same thing that they do. That's what the whole pyramid is based off of. They know that if they create this pyramid scheme, you are all going to be doing the same shit that the 1% up at the top does. And they're going to all just laugh at you all day. And they do. The society, the 99% society, does the same thing as the master class, as the 1%. And that's, dude, the joke has never ended. I know because I laugh at it. I look at all these people below the 1%, and they're all guilty of the same thing that the 1% does. And I laugh. I ran a channel for 7 years, endlessly exposing this, every video, laughing about it the whole time. So if I'm laughing and I'm not even part of the 1%, you can imagine. You can imagine. Now, you can disregard everything I'm saying because I'm not popular, I'm not trendy, I'm not an internet influencer, so I must not know what I'm talking about, right? And you can just discard this and not even think about anything that I'm saying and just keep on doing everything that you've always done. But there is no 99%. The only way to achieve the 99% would be to unify all these people. But you as a society is definitely never going to unify with these people down here, ever. That's the last thing on your mind, and it's apparent. All you have to do is look at the public square. What is the public square talking about? They never talk about these people except to point out how these people down here are, they're the useless eaters that are lazy, mentally ill, drug addicted, criminal, vagrants. So there goes 30% of your 99%. So we might as well call it the 70%. But then again, how much of this is true? So if you've got the upper class, the upper middle class, okay, we got the upper class, you see upper class, okay? And this is the 1%, okay? Upper class. Again, isn't that interesting how the subject of class is just conspicuously absent all the time, always in the public square? Nobody's ever talking. Do you think it's because why do you think that class is a subject that is never discussed in the public square? Is it because it's just organically it's just not important? That's why? Or could it be that they're intentionally controlling the narrative and intentionally preventing the subject of class from entering the public square? Something to think about. So you got the upper class, and this is the 1%, upper class. Then you got upper middle class, okay? Upper middle class. Then you've got middle class. Then you've got the working class. And everybody knows that these people are all, so we won't even talk about them anymore because we never do anyways. These people are never brought up in the public square. These people have no voice. You only talk about freedom of speech. Well, freedom of speech for what about these guys? They don't have a platform in the public square at all. I know there's always going to be someone, well, that's not true. They have Obama phones and just a bunch of just people just going to shit the bed. Whenever you start talking about this, all kinds of people are going to be coming out of the woodwork, shitting the bed, trying to argue how what I'm saying is wrong. But we all know this is what I'm talking about. This is third grade level shit. This is not super intellectual. This is just common sense what I'm talking. So here you have the working class, and as I pointed out in my last video, okay, do you think that the upper class, the upper middle class, and the middle class care about the working class? Do you really think that they do? Why would they care about the working class but not about the underclass? Well, let's look at what does the working class do? Well, the working class generally works for these people up here. So they are servants to the upper class, the upper middle class, and the middle class. So why would the upper class, the upper middle class, and the middle class care about their servants? Well, I'm sure that the upper class likes clean toilets, wouldn't you say? Yeah. We would all agree that the upper class likes their toilets clean. The upper class doesn't like to have shit and piss stains and stuff in their toilet, right? Okay, we'll all agree to that. Now, would you say that the upper class likes to clean their toilets? Well, of course not, no. Well, but what do we have down here? The working class, huh? Well, maybe we can get the working class, since they are servants of the upper class. The working class can clean the upper class people's toilets. So that would be a motive as to why the upper class might care about the working class. Yeah. Flipping hamburgers, cleaning toilets, mowing lawns, all the stuff that these people are too good to clean toilets. The upper class, the upper middle class, it's below them to clean a toilet. But you got the working class. So is that a principle of unity? So that's how you're going to unify the 99%, which we already know is only 70% at best. And so the principle of unifying the 70% is going to be based off of that the upper class cares about the working class because the working class cleans their toilets. That's the principle of unification, is money and prestige and property. So, and here's another question. So when you have the upper class, the upper middle class, and the middle class, and the working class, again, we all ignore that. It's just a given. We all ignore these people. These are the shitty people, right? They're the useless eaters. On a side note, isn't that what the 1% calls all of us, everybody, useless eaters? Oh, it doesn't matter though. Hypocrisy is not something we're going to. It's not very important. We've got more important things. So we won't get into the hypocrisy in all of this, 99% versus the 1%. But anyways, so who benefits most from the 1%? Who benefits the most? Well, it looks like since the upper class is just below the 1%, it looks as though the upper class benefits most, because as the wealth trickles down from the 1%, the upper class gets first dibs, right? So would that give the upper class a motive to protect the 1%? Well, we'll just take a conservative estimate that because the upper class benefits from the trickle down wealth of the 1%, we'll cut this in half. So probably only half of the upper middle class would actually care to unify in opposition against the 1%. So there you've lost more. So now you've got, let's say you've got 60% instead of 99%. Now you have 60% because you lost at least half of the upper class, because they're more interested in the trickle down wealth from the 1% than they are, unifying. So there goes 10%. And then of course everybody knows these people all suck. So none of them are, they're all these people are excluded from the 99% immediately. So now it went from 70% to 60%. Okay. But then it appears that the upper middle class also benefits from the trickle down, right? Because the 1% controls all the wealth, and then it all gets trickled down from the top. So the upper middle class also benefits from the trickle down much more than the middle class. So okay, so then we'll just say, let's say 5%. That's another conservative estimate, that 5% of the upper middle class are not going to be on your side because they're getting the trickle down. Let's say we'll say 7.5%. So now you've gone from 99% to 70%, and then from 70 to 60, and then from 60 to 52.5. Okay, but see, then the middle class also benefits from, because all the wealth is controlled up at the 1%, and the middle class like to be wealthier than the underclass. The middle class don't want to end up down here with all the ignored people, right? So then there's going to be a section of the middle class who's not going to be down with the cause either. And so we'll give a conservative estimate that 5% of the middle class, that's extremely generous, by the way. So now you've gone from 99% to 70% to 60%, then to 52.5%, then to 51, 50, 49, 48, 47, 46.5%. So it just went from 99% to 46.5%. And again, this is a very conservative estimate, really being generous, because we all know in actuality it's probably more like this. It's probably, the graph probably looks more like that there's a very tiny sliver of people that are actually down for the 99% versus the 1%. So now let's go to the idea of us versus them. Well, us versus them, who? You mean the upper class versus the underclass? The upper middle class versus the working class? The middle class versus the underclass? The working class versus the underclass? The 1% versus the middle class? The 1% versus the upper middle? So, again, let's write this down. Us versus them. Us versus them, right? Look at what they are doing to us, right? Us versus them. Because look at what they're doing to us. Who? Who's they? Who's us? Know thy enemy. Look at what they are doing to us. Know thyself. Look at what they are doing to us. So who is who? Who are you? Do you know who you are in this us versus them dichotomy? How real is this us versus them dichotomy? Again, know thy enemy. Know thyself. Who are you in the us versus them dichotomy?